Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, panelists and participants. I'm Tamana Zamir, International Data Alliance for Children on the Move Coordinator, also known as IDAC for short. And I'm honored to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of Danjan Yu, head of IDAC, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. IDAC is proud to co-organize this event alongside UNICEF Innocenti, the University of Virginia, and IGAD. IDAC was launched in 2020 to address the urgent need for better data on migrant and displaced children who are moving in unprecedented numbers globally. Today, IDAC's collective voice spans over 50 members, including UN agencies, international and regional organizations, NGOs, think tanks, academic experts, civil society, youth representatives, and 25 member states. And last November, we made a significant stride forward with a 3.5 million euro contribution from the European Union. Our work is more critical than ever. Since 2010, the number of forcibly displaced children has more than doubled, exceeding 47 million in 2023. Over the last 8 years, more than 62 million children have been internally displaced due to climate-linked events, which are only intensifying as the climate crisis worsens. So today, we are here to discuss the growing population of children who are on the move or soon will be due to environmental threats. Climate-related migration and displacement is increasingly gaining global attention at key events like next week's Global Mobility Summit during the General Assembly on the upcoming COP28. It is also a central issue in migration displacement frameworks such as the Global Compact for Migration, the Global Compact on Refugees, and the Secretary General's Action Agenda on Internal Displacement. As these discussions progress, it is crucial that the needs of children on the move remain a priority, including improvements in the data landscape. A recent IDAC report on climate mobility highlights significant gaps in our understanding of how climate-related migration impacts children. We still cannot accurately quantify how many children are or will be on the move due to climate change. Moreover, we need disaggregated data to explore how factors like age and gender influence these experiences. While we know that migrant and displaced children often face violations of their rights, we need more data to assess how climate change exacerbates their vulnerabilities. Today's event underscores the necessity for global collaboration to strengthen data and statistical systems in response to these evolving changes. This builds on the work IDAC and UNICEF Innocenti initiated last November during our workshop on climate-related child mobility data. We hope that these ongoing efforts will inspire governments worldwide to take decisive action and invest in producing child-specific migration and displacement data as the climate crisis deepens. So before I end here, I want to take the opportunity to thank you for your dedication to ensuring data works in the service of children's rights. We look forward to continued collaboration on behalf of children's on the move everywhere. Thank you.
Tamana, thank you so much for that kickoff. And I'd like to echo your warm welcome to colleagues who are joining us. Good afternoon, evening, and morning. My name is Josiah Kaplan. I'm a child protection specialist with UNICEF Innocenti's Global Office of Research and Foresight. And I'm excited to get right into the content of this webinar, which, as Tamana mentions, builds directly from a really rich and constructive conversation on the topic of children on the move data and evidence specific to climate-driven mobility, which we held in person in November last year in Geneva. That event was hosted by IDAC, which is co-funded by the European Union in partnership with UNICEF and the University of Virginia's Humanitarian Collaborative. And we're really pleased to continue that conversation here today with additional collaboration from IGAD, with both colleagues who joined us in Geneva, and also with many new participants. Which I think is a testament really to the relevancy of this particular space and the urgency of the intersections between children on the move, migration, and data and evidence system strengthening, which of course is a highly multi-sectoral agenda that includes all of us, aid agencies, regional organizations, ministries, and a special welcome to the National Statistics Office colleagues who are taking the time to join us as well, but also the research community, our colleagues in academia and civil society, and of course, members of the affected communities themselves. The objectives here today are to recap some of the key top-line insights and recommendations that have emerged from discussions within IDAC and the broader sector around identifying data gaps, priorities, and trends in climate-driven child mobility data, but also in facilitating knowledge sharing by highlighting emerging good practices and exploring potential collaboration opportunities between our institutions on joint data and joint research agendas relevant to this topic area. And I think also for us, it's very important to regularize this space and perhaps explore the appetite for establishing this semi-regular platform to maintain momentum between our conversations in, for instance, the run-up to COP29 and other key milestones. We're so fortunate today to be joined by a panel of experts to kick us off, and we'll then be opening to a broader question and answer discussion. Please put your questions, comments, suggestions, any reflections you have into the chat. Please don't feel you have to wait till the end of the presentations. Do so as they come to mind. And we'll have time after the panel presentations to discuss and invite our panelists to respond. This recording will, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be circulated afterwards. With all that being said, very briefly introduce our panelists and discussants and then turn over to them. You'll hear first from Dr. Evan Easton Calabria, who's a senior researcher at Tufts University, a research associate at the University of Oxford Refugee Studies Center, and a research consultant with UNICEF Innocenti. She's a specialist on climate mobility and the structures of humanitarian and development, including anticipatory action, refugee self-reliance, and local governance. Mohammed Omar is a thematic lead on human mobility at the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, ICPAC, where he focuses on the intersections of disaster, climate change, and human mobility. And prior to this, he served as durable solutions expert with IGAD's Health and Social Development Division. Ms. Yulia Duka is a program officer in the Climate Action Division, or CAD, at the International Organization for Migration, headquartered in Geneva. She has extensive experience in the intersections of migration and climate change, currently managing multiple relevant portfolios, focusing specifically on child's rights, youth empowerment, health, gender equality, disability, diaspora engagement in climate action. And last but absolutely not least, Professor David LeBlanc is the endowed professor of politics and professor of public policy at the University of Virginia, where he is a director of policy studies. Professor LeBlanc is an expert on data-driven social science research, and his scholarship focuses in particular on global political economy and migration. His publication record on this topic is extensive. I won't go into all of that, but his most recent book, The Ties That Bind Immigration and the Global Political Economy, was released in 2023 by Cambridge University Press. A gentle reminder that each panelist has about 10 minutes. That's just to leave us enough time for a full Q&A. So with that being said, thank you for everyone again for attending, and over to Evan to kick us off with a brief recap of the key takeaways from our previous discussions last November in Geneva.
Great, thanks so much, Josiah, and everyone here today. I'll share my screen and get us started. So as was previously mentioned, there was the opportunity for a group of people to come together in Geneva last November, and it was in person, but also experts came in from, I'd say, pretty much all around the world in a hybrid format as well. And I'm just going to share a bit of the takeaways and next steps of that workshop as a way to kind of ground us in the discussion. So this workshop was really aiming to bring together, I'd say, a lot of different topics, right? When we have this somewhat bulky term of climate-related child mobility data, there's a lot in there. So it was really an aim to bring together people from international organizations, academics, civil society, refugee-led organizations as part of that, UN agencies and others, to take stock of, try to improve, think of ideas, ways to improve data for informing solutions for the needs of children and their families in these circumstances, to establish, I'd say, the start of a shared research agenda. So trying to identify these common gaps, priorities, opportunities for research, but then also knowledge sharing and collaboration. And then to also start thinking through action items. So to build consensus on these immediate and also future priority actions around, I'd say, just further establishing this evidence base. And then you can see in the box that we had a few session objectives that were more around data, in particular around landscaping, trying to map collaboratively different sources and models and so on. So to get to the good stuff, what did we find after 2 days of discussion and during all of these discussions? Probably is not a surprise to many of you on this call that there's really big challenges and really big gaps in these efforts to improve this data and also just to generate this data in the first place. So the data, as Tamana mentioned at the very beginning, it's quite scarce. It's inconsistent, it's fragmented when we're looking at children and young people in climate mobility in whatever form, be that kind of quote voluntary or forced, and I'll get to that in a second. So we see a really big challenge of just lack of age disaggregation overall and a lot of data related to migration and displacement. Interestingly, particularly in topics or as well in topics that really matter for children of food insecurity and education, among many others. There's geographical challenges, so big data gaps in where the data we do have is coming from. So a lack of this data in low and middle income countries actually means we're quite geographically biased in a lot of what we know around how children are moving, why they're moving, the challenges they're encountering in terms of climate risks, and so on. And this is just representative of broader gaps. And then, as I mentioned briefly, this idea of classification and categorization. So how are we even determining why children are moving and if it's forced or voluntary? So it's really complex more broadly. And then the lack of age disaggregation makes it harder to know, in particular for children or for children and their families, what those drivers are. And then the generation, the management, the coordination of this data across global regions, across stakeholders is complicated. So a lot of the workshop participants talked about political will being a challenge, even though the Global Compact on Migration, the refugees, and so on are really important starting points, and there's more. But really there being a feeling that governments need to take the lead on these efforts and with stakeholder support, but that can be hard. And I'd say that that's also complemented by this broader gap in interoperability across data sets and prediction models, which likely as more and more data is generated, it will become harder to make it cohesive. And that makes it hard to know, kind of, again, across countries and in comparative research as well, what is really happening for children in different contexts. Key takeaway 2. The good news, a variety of displacement and mobility prediction models do exist and or are under development. So there's quite a few emerging. I'm sure many of you are aware of them by different agencies, academic institutions, and so on, but very few, and I would almost say none, but I won't say that, very few that we identified focus specifically on children. And so while there is a lot of work that's being done of looking at this intersection of climate hazards, migration, displacement, UNHCR has a really interesting model under development that we got to hear about at the workshop by the main researcher on it. IDMC's disaster risk model, IOM's doing important work. So there's a lot that's happening. But again, this issue of the data gaps come into play with these as well. And I'd say that something that really stood out to me as a takeaway from the workshop is this idea of alternative data sources and how important those are, proxy data and so on. But this challenge of what is relevant to children. So we had a speaker talk about using Facebook and Twitter and Google Trends and huge data analytics, except children don't really contribute to those data sources. So actually we can't scrape them in useful ways in the ways we might for other populations. So that being just one example of the challenges. And again, on the plus side, I think there was clear consensus that if more granular data were available, either collected or just made available, there were really clear opportunities to embed that information into models that could then have really important ramifications for better understanding future movement or needs as well. And the last takeaway I'll leave you with is there being a really clear consensus as well in value in developing a community of practice and more joint advocacy on increasing this data on climate-related child mobility. So there was a feeling that there was a strong need for more communication and cohesion across agencies to share learning as well as data, as well as best practices. And this idea of a community of practice, and even what Josiah briefly mentioned of just more regular convenings and conversations being an important way to start to use the data that we do have for more action and more impact. And that being really important in terms of thinking about coordination across different levels. So international consortia, that being big and important, but also just more agencies bilaterally sharing data and talking to each other could be really useful as well. And that all was really, I'd say, underpinned by a commitment for wanting this data to have impact, so that there's a need to better understand the types of data and data communication that might actually have more influence in policy changes and the sorts of assistance that we feel is needed in this sphere as well. And then I'll just give you two kind of broad sets of recommendations. So the first is around data availability and quality. So as came up in the data gaps, there's a real need to increase the data granularity and coverage. The data accuracy was an important one of people feeling like sometimes they had data sets, but they didn't know what are the confidence levels in these prediction models, for example, or so on. Increasing the data interoperability, which I spoke about already. Also really there being importance in building capacity in national data systems and engagement with data users. So feeling like if more migrants and refugees and other types of displaced people could be collected in national systems, it's a huge starting point for learning a lot more. And that takes resources and information and political will and so on, but it's really important. And then, of course, just maintaining responsible and ethical data practices that above all else, children need to remain protected and no data collection should happen at the risk of harm to them in any context, obviously, this one among them. And then recommendations came out around partnerships and knowledge sharing. So increasing access to models and data sets, which I spoke of, there being a real appetite for more of that. I think a lot of people within agencies that are doing this work and collecting this data felt like there were options and maybe data sharing agreements would have to be drawn up, but that shouldn't impede there being a lot of collaborative energy and spirit. And then I'd say the methodological transparency being important, an idea to develop a data landscape directory in terms of really having a broader repository of where does data exist around climate and migration data, and then what does exist that might be disaggregated that could be useful to children and their families and so on. So even it sounded like we were saying even just a list of hyperlinks could be really useful to get us started. And then again, this idea of developing more joint data agendas between different actors. And that really came out clearly of wanting and needing to include children and youth as part of that. So there was a representative from a refugee youth-led organization that spoke and was saying, we want to be partners in this knowledge generation and partners in collaboration and action. So in terms of next steps, I'd say that one of the key takeaways was kind of trying to build on this existing convening power. The IDAC platform, which we're able to make use of today, and the Global Refugee Forum and others are all really important steps, platforms, avenues to continue this conversation. And I'd say I'll end us with the what else, because I have the pleasure of being the first presenter and getting to hear more from the other panelists at this point. Thank you so much.
Evan, thank you so much. That was fantastic and a really helpful point of continuity with what we're going to hear now. I'd like to now turn over to Mohammed for your presentation. Please, Mohammed, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And I think you can see my presentation.
That's right. We can see that.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed Omar. I work with IDAC Climate Prediction and Application Center. IGAD is a regional bloc that is consisting 8 countries, including Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, and Somalia. And we are under African Union as one of the RECs. The IGAD Center of Climate Prediction and Application Center has been established as a drought monitoring center in the 1980s, but later on has been taken as 2007 or established under a protocol signed by the member states of IGAD, and is one of the World Meteorological Organization accredited centers. The services that IGAD provide is more on climate forecasting, disaster risk management, water resource, and other sectors that is more on contributing the sharing of the climate risks and also the climate information to the member states. We also convene the member states as forums every year, 3 times, and then we share the seasonal forecasts to the member states. So the IGAD region, when we look, we have this the climate vulnerability, but also the challenge that the region always experiences, which is droughts, but also floods and desert locusts, a cycle of events that come across. So what is more worrying is like this event is previously was more on having the time frame that was or the frequency that it used to happen was not that close each other, but now it's getting more and more closer, and also that makes more the population the impacts of this climate that is having it, but also the risk of displacement is highly increasing. And when you look also the trajectory that is taking, it is really more on increasing when you compare the figures of the displacement in 2010 to the one of 2022 or 2023. It is really highly increasing, where the overall number we used it to be less than 4 up to 5 million. Now it is increasing both the internal displacement and also the refugees in the region more than or close to 25 million. The region also experiences a lot of conflicts. That is also another additional layer that's affecting to the communities that is living in here, and the climate is causing another additional displacements. This sample of what ICPAC produces to the member states and is all accessible to the ICPAC websites. For the work that we have worked with joint UN agencies, including IOM, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, UNHCR, and ILO, we have focused on multiple pillars, but ICPAC with Platform on Disaster Displacement, and I am focused on pillars that's more on giving how we can understand and better predict and address migration movements, but also the risks of displacement. Under this, we have developed on flood displacement risk profile, but also cyclone displacement risk profile, which is accessible into the ICPAC geoportal, mainly focusing on how the region will look like in the near future, but also if you consider on the displacements in the current climate conditions, but also the displacements in the projected climate condition, using methodologies that is more on focusing the scenarios, both the current conditions, but also the future climate projected conditions. And when you see the results, it shows like the displacement that is projected under the climate current condition is under the current climate conditions 1.34 million, and there is the displacement that is projected under the climate conditions. Mainly, this is the flood displacement. In the projected climate condition is showing less number, but this also is something that has been calculated as the models that have been used. So we are not sure if this number also is will be the actual number, but it shows some hope, and we don't know the changes that will cause that the number will go down. The same when you see the population in the IGAD region, as they are having these challenges, there must be policies and strategies to be developed so that it can make reduce the number of the displaced people or the potential people that can displace. And we come up with to develop a model that can measure or look or give us the numbers, the impact of the policy options on flood displacement patterns. So we have looked at or selected different policies, including the early warning system if it is in place, and if there is other policies like house and repair program policies, or other build back better program or basic income program in place, how that it will impact on the people's perception, whether they move or not, or if disasters happen, particularly this case we were doing on the flood impacted communities. This has been done assessment that has been done in Sudan, the Nile Basin in 2022, before now the conflict has erupted. And it came at different insights. When you look at the model, the people that is displaced, but also the people that is trapped, and also the people that may need to be evacuated, are all has been assimilated in the model. And this is a snapshot of how the model shows when different parameters are selected. This is available also in the ICPAC geoportal as a detailed report on the methodology and everything that we have developed. And the main insights of that model is when you have policies that are effective, like early warning that's working effectively, and the people in that community, or maybe the government is providing basic income program, will be the best combination of more, if more policies are not existing. So the people may decide whether to move voluntarily before the flood is hit where they stay, if they know that if they trust the early warning system, but also if they know that there is a basic income program that is government providing. You can select different parameters that you can check how that different policies are impacting the people's perceptions, whether to move or not. And it's something that we have modeled and generated. This one, still we have as in-house. It is not available to the public, but we are going to, we created now to build, as I will mention later on the databases, that we are visualizing the displacements, but what we are going to do is to have another tier that can predict the displacement in the coming years. So we also have done some modeling work, more on focusing on the drought-induced displacement. This we have done together with other partners, GIZ mainly, and we were looking more on what is the relation between the rainfall and displacement, but also the rainfall and the livestock population. But also we have looked on the livestock and the livelihood of the people and the displacement. So we conducted a study more on that the climate change impacts the livelihoods of the people. So it also causes declining the animal health, and it also causes livestock loss in the region, mainly the areas that we have done the assessment. But also there is some norms that govern the human mobility in the context of climate change, that is more on the social norms and also the government regulations and the policies that are existing. Other findings that we got also included the how women participate when there is a hazardous, but also how men also participate, and the primary responsibility that is assumed men should take care. That also is accessible to the geo portal of ICPAC. If you want to dig further, you can check it and get a lot of recommendations, mainly considering the drought impacted communities in the Karamoja area. So, building on both interventions, ICPAC has built some visualization on more on putting the data of the displacement into the ICPAC early warning system that is also available and accessible to the public. What we are going to do as a second tier is to do the projection and the predictability to operationalize the models that we have created in the coming years. All this is available in here, and other publications also are available in here. We have not focused for the child-related data, but it's really something that, as the previous professor mentioned, also overlook everyone. But we will be considering as our next intervention is also to look on the child aspect and the child data. What we know so far is like the communities that are affected mainly are those who have been impacted, and those who are vulnerable are the woman and the child, and they are the majority of those who are suffering among the communities that are impacted the disasters. Thank you, and over to you.
Mohammed, thank you so much. And I think that is a perfect example of grounding some of these broader questions and opportunities in the concreteness of IGAD's leadership in this space. I'd like to now turn over to Yulia to provide our third and final presentation. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And maybe colleagues will help me to upload my presentation. But before that, allow me just to thank you for organizing and for bringing all of us together here. I think it's very crucial to have this kind of conversation, especially now that we are moving and preparing for other engagements like the COP29 and others, where it's extremely important to raise the gaps that we face in regarding the climate migration. So thank you for putting the presentation online, and thank you to all of you connecting from all over the world. And we look forward to the questions and to really trying to engage with you through chat and conversation, and also learn from your perspectives. When it comes to the maybe next first slide, thank you. I'm not sure if I'll say something new today, but definitely I'll highlight some of the main keys and messages that we have when it comes to the climate migration in general, but also with a specific focus on children. So allow me maybe from my own side just to pinpoint again on some main keys, things that I would like to flag in order to connect then to the data gaps that we face in regarding the climate migration and children. So first and foremost, climate migration or environmental migration, as we know, it's a very complex phenomenon, which requires a very comprehensive approach. And I'm also happy to see here UNICEF and IGAD partners that we work very closely with globally and in region on this topic. So very briefly, maybe from my side to mention that, as you know, climate-induced migration is not a singular or uniform occurrence, but a very complex one. As mentioned, it arises from both sudden or slow onset events, which has direct implication on the way the data is being collected. Also, the climate migration, it can happen internally or cross-border, which also has a key impact on the data. But when it comes to the vulnerable groups, we need to recognize the disproportionately effect that climate change has on their mobility. And these vulnerable groups includes, of course, children and the youth, especially those also living in very high-risk areas. When it comes to the terminology and the legal frameworks, these are still evolving, and there are many conversations around. But again, this leads us to the gaps in the data collection in terms of how we define. But when you look at youth, again, how we define which is up to each age is a young person, and so on. So all these things that I wanted to very briefly pinpoint has direct implication on the data that we collect. Next slide. Yes, so understanding the multi-causality of migration is essential. So we know very well that people move for various interlinked reasons. And as I mentioned earlier, climate change acts as a stress multiplier, exacerbating already existing vulnerabilities, as in the case of the children. So I leave you here with the graphic that I invite you to study a bit more in depth. But maybe as an example, when we look at a deteriorating environment that affects agriculture, this leads to economic decline, and definitely this compels family to migrate in search of viable livelihoods. Therefore, it's very imperative to adopt a holistic approach that considers all contributing factors to ensure the solutions we propose are comprehensive and sustainable, and address everybody's needs, including the children's ones. Next slide. Thank you. So when it comes to the research that has been done on the topic, there is a growing information happening on the topic of the climate migrations, especially since 2010 with the adoption of the Cancun framework. But also when it comes to the children needs and rights in the context of climate migration, conversation have started a bit more recently, and the discussion is still evolving. Next slide. Thank you. So from my side, I invite you to have a look maybe at the Global Data Institute's periodic global report on the state of solutions to internal displacement that also emphasizes a bit on the number of the internal displaced children. And as mentioned here, the report flags on the 18 million IDPs children that live in 16 priority countries that have been identified by the SDG's Action Agenda on Internal Displacement. Again, this report emphasizes the scarcity of data that has also been mentioned by colleagues in previous presentation. And we know that what I also want to flag here when it comes to the IDP and this report, what we also know, it's the number of displaced persons is divided between those that move in the context of conflict and those that move in the context of disaster. But again, the lack of the data collection comes related to those that move in another context related to climate change, like slow onset events. Next slide. Thank you. So the age disaggregated migration data is scarce. It has been said already by colleagues here, but I want to emphasize again, because this is one of the biggest gaps that we have when we look at protecting the rights of the children in the context of climate migration. One of the most comprehensive reports that we have when it comes to the data collection related to people moving in the context of climate change, specifically disaster, is the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center report that emphasizes on the number of displaced because of disaster. But this also has a huge gap because it doesn't emphasize the number of children that are among these IDPs, and it also doesn't look at those that cross border. From IM side, we work very closely to our tools, specifically the displacement tracking monitoring tool, to support the analysis of those moving in the context of climate change within the borders of the same country. And I know from IM side and also in collaboration with UNICEF and others, there have been done in-depth analysis to try to identify or at least try to analyze how children have been impacted by these and displacement movements over the past years. Thank you. Next slide. When we look also a bit on the projection in the future on how we can prepare and have anticipatory action in place in the service of migrants, displaced people, and also looking at children, there are many conversations, and there's also the difficulty in having a precise prediction of what does it mean. We know, for example, that climate impact models inform us where and when humans will be exposed to hazards. There are also reports emphasizing the number of children already living in very hotspot, vulnerable climate areas worldwide. And we can also make an analysis to understand how this can have implications on their mobility in the future based on that. So from IM side, the Global Data Institute Mobility Data Lab has this way of tracking and analyzing the vulnerable areas with implications on the data. Next slide, please. Thank you. So related to the uncertainties, as I mentioned, there are also reports and data has been predicted for the past 3 decades of what would it mean for people, the impact of climate change, also looking at their mobility. There's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that has said with his first edition in 1990s that climate change could have concrete implications on people mobility in the future. So 3 decades later, the same IPCC report has come and emphasized the concrete implications that climate change has on human mobility. And a lot of data has been collected in the past years to really emphasize of this tendency of the growing tendency of people being displaced or moving in the context of climate change. But again, when we look at the projections, there are many uncertainties, and this comes through because of different factors, as mentioned here. For example, the vulnerability or the resilience of people to the climate change impacts the complex nature of individual migration response, the nature of climate change, and others when it comes to the predictions. Again, one of the most comprehensive reports that we refer when working on the topic of climate migration in general is the World Bank report that looks at the future and says that without concrete climate action today, we can see more than 200 million people being internally displaced by 2050. But there's again a gap in this kind of analysis because it's generalized about all people and it doesn't look at disaggregated data to really know how many children, for example, will be affected by these predictions and these numbers, to make sure that we address and we have a comprehensive approach to make sure that their rights are respected and they are protected. Next slide. I wanted to emphasize here, but I won't stop here on this. I just wanted to emphasize again the fact that there's this trapped population, while we call those that are left behind and living in spot and very vulnerable climate conditions. And this also includes very much the children and women, because the tendency is for men to travel in search of other opportunities, and children and women are those that tend to be left behind, living in very vulnerable areas, as I mentioned. Next slide. Yes, so maybe I'll stop here a bit very briefly, because I know the time is limited and we also want to hear from you and answer your questions. So maybe a few points from my side when it comes to the data collection challenges and the gap that we face. And first and foremost, what I want to mention, again, I know it's repetitive, but it's one of the gaps that we have, is the lack of disaggregated data. So while we have a broad statistic on migration flow, we often lack detailed information segmented by age, gender, and other critical demographics. So we know that children and youth, who comprise a substantial proportion of global population, are frequently categorized, included in the general categories, and this makes them twice invisible when it comes to addressing the data and also addressing their needs. Secondly, we face temporal data insufficiencies. We know that climate migrations is not a one-time event, but a process that unfolds over time. So the longitudinality of data, which tracks individuals and communities over extended periods, is essential to make sure that we capture the full spectrum of impacts and responses. And unfortunately, such data is scarce, leaving us with a fragmented understanding in general, and again, amplify when it comes to the children as a group. And my last point here that I want to mention is the geospatial data gaps further compound the problem, because we know that climate change does not affect all regions equally and does not affect communities and groups equally, and including when we look at children, and we know that it's not a homogeneous group as per se, and they have different needs. And migration patterns in general vary in this context. So high resolution, location-specific data is crucial to make sure that we tailor interventions to local realities, especially in global south, where data still remains a problem, collection of the data. Next slide. Thank you. So very briefly, I added here some of the key messages that I want to be summarized what I was trying to say today. Looking more broadly, what does it mean, the climate migration as a concept, but also all applied to the context of the children, which we are trying to discuss here today. Next slide. Thank you. So from the International Organization for Migrations, there are many tools and information that has been produced over the past years on the broadly topic of the climate migration, climate and environmental migration. But there's also been analyses related to the children moving in the context of climate change or being displaced in this context. But much more needs to be done both on the whole spectrum of climate migration when it comes to addressing the gaps in the research and addressing the gaps in the data collection, but more specifically when we look about the children's rights and the youth type of movements in this context. Thank you. So with this, I'll finalize my presentation, and I'm open for any kind of questions. And I thank you again for your attention. Hope I was not speaking very quickly, but
no, that was perfect. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to participants that we will also be circulating the slides along with the recording. So there's going to be an opportunity as well for you to review some of these points offline. Sincere thanks to colleagues from IOM, from IGAD, and from UNICEF. And we'll now move to a open question and answer session. Please, for those of you who have not done so, drop your questions into the chat. We've had a few already come through, and a few also sent to us through other channels. So we should have a couple to really kickstart this conversation. Before we dive into specific questions, though, I just wanted to invite panelists, if any of you have had reflections on any of the presentations you've heard from your co-panelists, perhaps points that surprised you or that didn't surprise you and you see as indications of what we are sharing in terms of challenges. Please, I'd like to open the floor to you first before we turn to specific questions. And if you just begin speaking, we'll spotlight you. So Evan, I think over to you.
Great, I'll be spotlighted. Yeah, thank you to everyone. It was really interesting, and I had to pull up my notebook to take notes. Mohammed, I just have a question about IGAD being obviously comprising a lot of different countries, and I would just be curious if you have reflections on kind of data sharing across countries, and if that's something that's a challenge, or how has that worked, and if there's any kind of takeaways for others in that regard.
Yes, thanks a lot. For the member states, as really you mentioned it, the data is really, we have that is already existing is really in a short. In general, when you see it, we don't have like data that can clearly give you the socioeconomic data or other data. But there's some data that is shareable and also some data that the member states share. We convene in some platforms. Particularly when you see the sectors that I was mentioning, the water resource, the disaster risk management, all other sectors, the agriculture, they come together. They share, also co-produce with us some of the data to be also realistic. Some of the data, like the water data, in some of the countries, they are very sensitive on it, to share with others, as some of the water related data is like a security issue to them in the practical realities we see. But in general, the other data that the season and how it's behaving, but also the data related to the migration is the data that they share. There is also some migrants that may be crossing from one border to another country, going or heading to the Gulf countries. So that data also is the data that they share some of the time. But most of in our platforms that we convene, we have on them sharing it, but there is no any harmonized way that is, but IGAD and the member states that is really working in the IGAD migration. We have the statistic unit that's closely working to the other members' statistics. So we are really hoping to at least build it and make it enhance it in the near future. But there is a challenge that the data that's existing is not standardized, but also the data is not, the methodology also is not harmonized, but also the mechanism of sharing is now something that we are really working on it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really interesting. And I'd say the challenges you brought up, I think, are very common.
Great, thank you so much. It was an excellent exchange. Yulia, David, any other thoughts before we turn to some of the other questions that have come up? If not, which is totally fine. We've had some excellent comments. Just a reminder as well to participants. Unfortunately, we can't take direct interventions by audio. So if you could just put your comments in the chat. Let's start with a question about from a colleague, Satoshi Watrai here at UNICEF Innocenti, who asks, could you share some of the most innovative data-driven research initiatives in the area that you have encountered? And what would you say are some of the bottlenecks or opportunities for scaling those research initiatives? So this would, I guess, be specific applications of available data to cutting-edge research projects. Let me again open that to the panel for any responses.
I can jump in again.
Please, Evan. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for the question. I'm not, innovative. It's always kind of what's actually innovative. But I'd say one of the projects that I've been the most excited about that I've been part of in the last year or so has been, it sounds kind of similar to Yulia's, one of what you mentioned about what the Mobility Data Lab is doing. So I'm going to look more into that. But it's really been looking at populations that are already displaced and trying to map down to really the settlement, camp, city level where they are, and then transposing hazard data on top of that. So really looking for floods, cyclones, heat, drought, et cetera. Retrospective historical analyses of the incidence of these hazards in these regions, and then also projections to the extent that they're available and kind of deemed rigorous enough. And so the aim of this, and I'm kind of doing this with my hands because it's kind of mapping and layering, was to really identify kind of hotspots where there's large amounts of displaced people exposed to many, many hazards. So we mapped 43.2 million people in the top 10 IDP and top 10 refugee hosting countries. Sudan overlapped with both of those. And we found that most people are exposed to at least 3 hazards, many to 4 and 5, everyone to at least 1. I think we all are. But it was quite shocking in terms of the multi-hazards. And the reason why I do think it's innovative in the sense of, I guess, combining different data sets and so on. But the part that I've been the most excited about is this idea of going as granular as possible, because I think we can do that in terms of countries and hazards quite easily. But when we look really specifically at how many IDPs are in this one location, is that location near a river? Has there been, challenges with flooding? Is it still high flood risk? Then we get to be a lot more specific around types of assistance and programming. In a perfect world, there's places that should be relocated for a variety of reasons and so on. And I'd say what I would love to be able to do, but have not been able to do yet, is to disaggregate that data by age. So to really be able to understand in this place, in this place, in this place, where are the children and what are they being exposed to? So to me, that feels like a promising foundation that has a lot more potential with more different types of data and more granular data.
Evan, thanks. Excellent. And I think that is really what we were talking about when we say innovative. That is, as you said, a very subjective term, but what is pushing the envelope of what we are currently able to do? Let me just take a quick check to see. Yulia, would you like to come in on that question?
Yes, maybe I can you even for giving this great example. From my own side, there are many projects related to the data, and I invite all of you here, if you're curious, to dive more into the Global Data Institute from IOM side to also understand how IOM is collecting their data. We have all our experts working on this, but maybe something in terms of innovative approach when it comes both related to data and the topic of climate migration. It's a project that IOM has in Paraguay, related to indigenous communities, where we work very closely with them to understand their needs, to understand the migration moving, like both migration, both displacement in the context of climate change, to understand a bit their necessities. But this is a project that looks overall to the indigenous communities as per se. And this leads me to repeat after even what she said, that we would also, I mean, also from my side, to disaggregate the understanding and the data and an understanding of what does it mean for a child within an indigenous community, these impacts that it has on his mobility. I just wanted to emphasize again on this, which I think is as this kind of a innovative approach, but yeah, much more information is being circulated and can be dived into. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Apologies. I just had a brief technical glitch there. Thank you so much on that. I'd like to turn the question to actually two questions we've received that are complementary to each other on the topic of youth engagement and youth participation in these processes. We had one question from Keisha German, who is a member for the Youth Committee on Migration Displacement Data with NYCP and IDAC. Keisha, thanks so much for your question. You had asked first if the November 2023 workshop that initiated this current discussion engaged with youth voices, and just to say that yes, NYPC was part of that discussion, but there's a lot more that can be done here. You had a general question about how to the panel about how we are ensuring that various research and reports incorporate the voices and perspectives of young people, particularly those directly affected by climate mobility, as co-creators of this knowledge and evidence. But we also had a question just received from Vivian Madekwe from Volunteers for Cause, who asked a similar related question: how can youth effectively contribute to their country's sustainability plans, particularly in the areas of adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction? So I guess for the panel, to simplify that question, how can we ensure meaningful child and youth engagement in both the data collection, research and analysis stage, but also in the participatory design of country sustainability plans? Let me open that to any panelists who'd like to jump in.
I could start, if okay for all.
Please, thank you.
Yes, and thank you for raising this question, which is of much importance for us at IOM. The work that we do on youth engagement, it's quite of a priority for us, especially in the space of climate migration. We are engaging with young people for over a few years now, both at global and at regional level, in different international conversations. But now looking more specifically at the upcoming COP29, I would also like to emphasize that from my side, we are going to support 20 young people to come with us at the climate change conference happening later in Azerbaijan, exactly to bring the voices of young people. And now that we are actually in process of going through all the applications that we received, we are trying to bring the diversity voice that young people have when it comes to addressing the topic. And we know that, as I mentioned earlier about children not being a homogeneous group, it happens the same with the young people, because we have young people that have a great knowledge. They are diving into their research. They are looking very much in what does it mean the climate change impacts on mobility, what does it mean for children, what does it mean for young people, what does it mean for disabled people, and so on. So they do have a very great understanding, and a lot of research is being done by young people. And I take this to also congratulate and encourage all of the young people to continue doing so. But at the same time, we have all those young people that live in very vulnerable areas that maybe have been displaced several times. They know what it means to live in an IDP camp because of climate change or conflict related, and the impact that climate change has on them. So we also try to bring the voices of young people that suffer or are impacted by climate change, and this leads to their displacement or decide to migrate and so on. We also try to bring those voices in climate change conferences from IOM side, but also thinking about the youth advocates that are really focusing on really sending out their message, because we know how young people are connecting today through social media and everything that is happening right now. And this it's a great advantage for us as a community and trying to address these gaps when it comes to data, when it comes to understanding the climate migration globally, but also with a specific focus on children and on youth. So many initiatives we are still building, so bear with us. We also open always the floor for young people to let us know how we can actually do it better, to make sure that we do this sustainably and not just check the box and bring them in one conference and that's it, but really try to build together from the global to the local level on both addressing the topic of climate migration, both addressing their needs, but both making sure that the young people are really part of the conversation. So there are many other examples that I can think of, but just wanted to flag on youth participation in, and maybe if you allow me just a few more seconds, just to say from my own side that we have launched recently a blog series. The blog series has been developed also thinking about how we can offer a space to young people to share their views, share their research, share their, I don't know, experiences when it comes to climate migration in general. And we have more than 30 blog pieces that I invite all of you to have a look at posted.im environmental migration portal. Amazing blog pieces received by young people where they came and express and let us know what can be done from their perspective. There are also interesting conversation around the AI and how can this be applied when it comes to disaster risk reduction approaches and so on. So many ideas have come out of this, and this is just the first step that we took from IM side to make sure that we amplified and we actually give a space to young people to share their voices with everyone. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Fantastic. I also just want to draw attention to a few links that Evan shared in the chat that we produced at UNICEF Innocenti on the role of refugee-led youth organizations as community-based partners in not just the validation of research, not just the inputting to data and evidence, but as knowledge co-creators and in a meaningful way. And actually, just on this topic, because I think we're doing fairly well for time, I was curious if colleagues have any reflections on engaging with youth in the actual technical aspects of data analysis, validation, ground truthing of some of our research. Because I think that's something that at Innocenti we're very interested in doing, bringing them in as meaningful knowledge co-creators. So kind of an open question if anyone has any examples. Also, to colleagues in the audience, please, and I see you're doing this already, so thank you, put in any references to your own work or good practices you're aware of.
I
Evan,
haven't done kind of the data validation that you're talking about, but I think refugee-led organizations and refugee youth-led organizations are a really amazing opportunity for that, right, in terms of data collection and sense checking and so on. So I've worked with refugee-led organizations for over 12 years, and then as part of our work together at Innocenti, we've started looking at the fact that youth themselves are not just receiving assistance, they're offering assistance, and they're interested in and engaged in helping each other, and that includes in knowledge generation. And so I just wanted to say, I think there's a lot of potential for that, and it could be an exciting way to, I think, further kind of solidify refugee youth-led organizations as real entities, because they are, but also take a lot from the knowledge and kind of sense checking, as you're saying, that people who are living in these experiences can offer.
Mohammed, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. For IGAD side, also we really engage the youth in terms of when you see the youth that are involved on the refugee organizations or the voices, also the refugees that is mainly also represented by youth. So when we are also doing declarations, IGAD has some quite declarations that we generate, particularly focusing on the youth and jobs creation and the livelihood, and targeting mainly the refugee youth or the displaced youth. So we bring them so that we hear their voices, and also they are part of the whatever policies that we are putting in place. What's also interesting is IGAD has also developed the IGAD child policy. It's more on the implementation of the African Charter on the rights and the welfare. That has been also been taken to the member states where IGAD was with the member states, but also other organizations were engaging childs on that policy development and the process related within the member states. And when you see also we have a youth envoy that is part of IGAD, the envoys that IGAD is having in the region. So mainly he's taking the initiatives of youth and the agenda of the youth of the organization to the different areas of youth concerned activities. But also under African Union, we collaborate on the advisory committee of the youth. That's called IAP, and we really engage them also and see how we can partner them as a regional organization on the youth related disaster activities. Mainly, it is under the disaster initiatives that African Union is implementing, and we really collaborate them as a regional organization in ECPAC. So that's some quite I can say. Thank you.
Mohammed, thank you so much. Just a quick note, Evan is double booked, so she will have to leave in a couple minutes. But I also want to pick up here on a theme of the ethics and complications around data sharing. First of all, we had a question from Miriam Nitsky at GIPS. Can you share and recommend any tools or methods to collect data on displaced children? These could be qualitative or quantitative methods, which ensure responsible and ethical data collection. And I guess as a related point to that, do any of the panelists have reflections on some of the complications and perhaps solutions they've found in terms of the data sharing protocols and procedures in place for working with other organizations, other ministries, in the management of often very, very sensitive data sets?
I can
Please,
speak to a
Evan.
version of this quickly.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm talking to the media when I just drive my own message home because it's a bit of on the sides. But I would say that in terms of different data, and this isn't about data collection directly, but it's about how do we make use of data that we do have, that we do feel is comfortable using and so on. A UNICEF colleague approached us probably about a year ago and said, I'm being called by national governments to provide assistance for children after an emergency, and I can't give estimates of the rates of unaccompanied children, and particularly IDPs. And so can we find a way to start to estimate the rates of these unaccompanied children? And we started digging into the data, and it's really hard. And this gets into also what reasons why people move. It's hard to make that link and so on. But in the end, we realized that some of the most granular data we had access to that could help us with that were actually multi-sectoral needs assessments from different settlements and camps. And that some of the questions, and this also gets to another great question around invisible children that's in the chat. Some of the questions were saying, do you have a missing child in your household? Or do you have a new child that has come that was unaccompanied and so on? So these are questions that are asked to adults about children that are close to them. And I think that's an important, in the lack of data in the way that we want it, right? I think as all of us have shared in some ways, I think there's important kind of proxies that can get us closer to answering some of these questions that where I would say at this stage of at least using the secondary data, I would feel quite comfortable doing that. Those were actually open access. I think it's HDX that we were able to find them and so on. So maybe that's a little bit of a call to action in terms of searching for those alternative sources that aren't the panacea in terms of information, but get us a little bit closer and still kind of meet the ethical requirements for data collection or data usage regarding children.
Great, Evan, thank you. Actually, that kind of picks up on another very interesting question. You alluded to this in your comment about the role of invisible children. So we had a question from Sasbila from the Youth Committee on Migration and Displacement Data with NYCP, and how are IOM and UNICEF and perhaps IGAD planning to address this issue of invisible children who are displaced due to slow onset climate disasters, but do not fall under traditional migration categories? And perhaps I could ask colleagues from IOM and IGAD for your thoughts on that.
I can jump in. Yes, thank you for this. And by also building a bit on what Yvonne was mentioning earlier, but also what I want to say, and this leads me back to my presentation, where I started with the complexity of what it means climate migration. As I mentioned, this is, I wouldn't say a recent topic, but even from my side, we started in 1990s to look more and dive more into what it means, people moving in the context of climate change. And since 2010, our member states have approached. I am saying like, look, this is getting more visibility, and this is something that needs to be addressed. So this also to emphasize on the fact that while people have always migrated because of environmental consideration and factors, this has taken a totally different approach in the past. Let's just say maybe 1 decade, but also the research is a lot that has a lot of gaps. When it comes to the data collection as per se, this has improved and it's a work in progress. The data has been collected in the past year has improved a lot, which leads us to a more accurate number of how many people are being internally displaced because of disaster, for example. But there's the whole like of really knowing how many people are displaced of migrate crossing borders, or because of slow onset events and so on. So they are in order to understand then the needs of children and how many children are moving in the context of climate change, there's a lot of work still to be done. And as I mentioned from my side, there's a whole team in place looking exactly and analyzing the data. But I just wanted to emphasize again that the way the data has been collected has improved, and it's still being improved, and it's still being developed, and in order to arrive to a more accurate number, in order to develop policy, but also when it comes to children and youth even more. So from my side, also how we work and how we try to approach this, we work very close, for example, in partnership here with UNICEF, with colleagues in addressing this topic. We started conversations some years ago, brought together a lot of experts to try to understand what are the gaps and which one will be the first steps that we should take in order to get more visibility on the needs and the number of people being displaced in the context of climate change, and to ensure that they do not remain invisible when it comes to the policy development that address their rights and their needs as well. So much work needs to be done, and I also want to flag on this in addressing the whole spectrum of climate migration, but looking more precisely to children. And I give the floor maybe to our colleague here from IGAD, and I don't want to occupy the whole space. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Luli. I think you have really covered it. And when we also our side, we really have been considering for how it's affecting the child when we are setting up policies. There is standard operating procedures that we have created together with IOM and the platform on disaster displacement with some of our member states on particularly how to handle the cross-border movements of between Ethiopia and Kenya, but also Kenya and Uganda. That we also have been done some assimilation exercise we tested. And one of the components is that this will be addressing and how it is really clarifying how to address is the issues related to the child that are combining with their varieties or unaccompanied minors. So it's really something that we really need also to do more in terms of when we are collecting the data to be more specific on looking the child's needs, but also how the vulnerabilities they are having and what can be done when they are displaced, but also when they are on the move and when they are really crossing the borders. So it's something that really we have done some work, but still there is a window to be enhanced and developed. Thank you.
Mohammed, Yulia, thank you so much. And I think apologies to all participants who have asked questions. We only have time for one more. I'd like to take the question from Robert Oakes, UN University, who asks, picking up on that earlier theme around innovative data and approaches on displacement outcomes, what can we say and what do we need to know about the duration and costs of displacement? That's a fairly broad question, but I'm curious to hear panelists' thoughts.
Maybe I can
Yulia, please.
come. Exactly. I'll focus maybe on the duration of the displacement and the cause that we know that this is also a discussion ongoing here. And thank you, Robert, for raising this up here. It's a pity you cannot take the floor because we know you would have had great inputs to bring in this discussion. But maybe exactly like the duration of the displacement, because the reaction, like the tendency of already reacting when a disaster is happening, and where we want to try to move beyond that and try to understand what are the needs of those displaced before the disaster happened, during the disaster, and after the disaster. And we unfortunately see very often in practice how people have been displaced, they have been addressed their needs during the disaster and the displacement movement because of the disaster, but there's also the protracted displacement of those being displaced because of disaster impacts and still remaining years and just building a life in internal displacement camps. And this has a profound implications on children, of course, but also very much related to the needs of people in general, but more specifically to children and the vulnerability that's often increased in this kind of context. So also the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center report, when they do the analysis of how many people are displaced in the context of disasters, there's also the analysis of how many people live in protected displacement at the end of each year, which also emphasize of the importance of not just trying to look at the data of how many people are being displaced or moved, but also how many people remain in that vulnerable condition after the disaster has passed. So again, this leads me to the complexity of the case, and a lot of work is still being done, and we have all the experts here, including Robert, in understanding and making all the links.
Leah, thank you so much. And again, just really important and excellent point to end on, because it just reemphasizes we're talking about a nexus issue here. We're talking about protraction into longer term, ideally sustainable solutions, and a conversation that too often can be siloed into either humanitarian or development domains. We are very fortunate as well to have David kindly offer to, and perhaps heroically offer to if not sum up, at least share some of his reflections in the last couple of minutes, and then we'll bring this webinar to a close. So David, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks to Evan, Mohammed, and Lulia for their comments and their answers to, I think, what are a set of really interesting, penetrating, and important questions. I just want to say at the very beginning that it is super important that these kinds of conversations occur. When I looked at the list of attendees at the beginning, I saw a number of names of people who I recognized from academic institutions. And I think what is very important is that, at least in the time that I've been working with Save the Children and now with Innocenti, is the number of opportunities for academics and people who work in the front lines of displacement, especially child displacement, are in conversation with one another. Because those of us who work in university have, I'm just going to say, far less opportunity to talk with people and to understand what's happening on the front lines. And so the opportunity to share data, to share insights, and to learn more about what's happening in context is really indispensable. In terms of overall reflections, I think it's probably best summarized by maybe a small bullet that was on Lulia's slide. And when I read it, I thought, oh, wow, she's just summarized everything here. And what she wrote, what she had written down, if I have this correct, is it says, however, the likely human mobility response to these hazards is uncertain and difficult to forecast. Right? I think I got that right, Lulia. You can correct me if I've missed a piece. Right? And as we talk about climate-based displacement or climate-based migration, one of the things that really came to bear during the conference we had in November is that we talk, and especially if you read the media reports, we talk in generalities, right? And these generalities are perhaps useful for getting policymaker and the public's attention, but they're not particularly useful if we want to understand displacement, especially when it comes to children. If you look at data, global data for this past summer, and you think about climate change measured just based on anomalies, temperature anomalies, the largest anomaly this past year was Europe. Right? That really doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot about people who are being displaced, because what we need to focus on is we need to think about opportunities and abilities for adaptation. We need to understand the ability for technology to play a role. In Europe, air conditioning, right? Whether it, the availability of air conditioning. If we think about agricultural economies or agricultural societies, we need to think about, innovations having to do with crops and crop rotation, more resilient kinds of pesticides and seeds, different sorts of planting techniques. These are things that inject a lot of heterogeneity into the kinds of responses that we observe when we are looking at something as general as climate change. And even if we narrow it down, there's an enormous amount of heterogeneity. And so one of the things that I take away from the conversation that we had today and the conversation we had a year ago is that we need to really work harder to center the individuals, not who are displaced, but the individuals who remain, right? Focusing on people who remain in place as or after a climate shock or during slow onset climate change has occurred. It may be, and again, Lulia has a wonderful slide where she talks about trapped populations. But there's another way of thinking about these populations, and that's that, people, especially if we look at agricultural communities, and not just agricultural communities, there are strong ties to the land, right? And then once you pick up and leave, the family doesn't have an asset anymore, or they're leaving their asset behind, right? And so what we found in some of the work that my team have done looking at Central America is that it takes generational change for people to be willing to pick up and leave, right? Because once they leave, they have the family, the extended family has no asset anymore. And so thinking about forced migration, I think, is essential and is important, but we also have to think about individuals who voluntarily remain, right? So they don't remain because they're trapped, but they choose to remain because, again, this is the only asset that they have, right? The next thing that I wanted to mention, and again, I think we've done a really good job, and the questions have asked, the folks, the comments in the chat have asked really hard questions about disaggregation and the ability to come up with disaggregated data. I think there's also an opportunity to think about aggregation in the context of are we separating children from families? And what I mean by that is, should we think differently about families on the move, families with children, and unaccompanied children, or at least that's the terminology that we use in the United States when we think about the southern border. The sorts of processes and the factors that lead to unaccompanied children are likely correlated with, but different from, the sorts of phenomena that lead families to be displaced or to migrate across different spaces, right? And I think that is important as we think about households and household resilience, but also when we think about the effect of climate change on displacement, the permanence of displacement, and the location or the eventual location of those who are displaced. And the final comment I will make, and again, I think this is just to repeat what has been said both by Mohammed and Lulia, is, we need more data, not just on the perception of migration, but on the perception of routes. Right, so we did with UNICEF, we did another conference I think it was May of 2023 in Panama, where we were focusing on immigration and child migration through the Western Hemisphere. And a lot of that focused our attention on the Darien. And how do we think about the factors that lead children but also families to pursue the Darien route as a means for moving through Central America, moving through South America and into Central America, and eventually up north. And a lot of that conversation focused on how do we think about what the harms are across those routes, because that factors into decisions, initial mobility decisions anyway, or at the first order. So I'll just conclude with those comments, but also just to say, it is very valuable that we continue the conversations and that we continue to share what we are learning about these extraordinarily complex, but also extraordinarily heterogeneous kinds of phenomena that are so central to the work that we're all doing. So thank you for the opportunity, Josiah, and to Innocenti for inviting me, and again, for having this opportunity to learn from everybody else.
David, thank you so much. That was a fantastic summary. I just want to note that we have a few questions we haven't been able to address. Apologies to Walid Mohammed about the experiences related to collecting data for children in displacement context using big data, for instance. These are discussion points that we are going to carefully note in our summary of this webinar, and they're points for continuing discussion, because quite frankly, I think we could be here for a very productive afternoon, and it's very encouraging to see the richness of this dialogue. We see this as an established community of practice, and we look forward to continuing this discussion around climate, mobility data, and children, not least of which at the IDAC annual conference, where a number of these topics, including youth engagement, ethical data collection, and visible children, will be discussed as well. Likewise, Jasper from Impact Reach mentioned multi-sectoral needs assessment data, another critical point for further dialogue. So with all that being said, all that's left for me to do here is to again express my sincere thanks to Evan, Julia, Mohammed, David, but also to all of you for taking the time to join the discussion, for your excellent questions and shared resources, both those we've had a chance to dig into and those that remain hooks for continuing dialogue. I'd also like to thank IDAC and EGAD for co-hosting, and a very special thanks to University of Virginia for enabling today's webinar. We'll be circulating the presentation, recording, and follow-up, and I look forward to anyone who's joined this webinar to reach out to us bilaterally as well to continue the discussion. So thank you all very much, and hope you have a good afternoon, evening, or morning.